And
Greetings. We're here to present where we're at digital preservation for HBCUs during uncertain times. My name is Dr. Constance Caddell. I'm University Archivist at Tuskegee University.
And my name is Cynthia Wilson. I'm the museum's operations manager and educator at Tuskegee University.
So today's session will proceed as follows. We're going to first kind of give you a background of the landscape of HBCUs, the challenges that the HBCU archives are facing, and also a brief history and description of our own archives at Tuskegee University. And then we'll get into the meat of the session when we talk about how we meet the needs of our archives and also stay abreast of the current trends and the digital processes. And we'll look at some solutions and also even look at a bonus solution before we conclude. So just a brief background, it's pretty much known that we consistently face challenges of sustainability at historically Black colleges and universities. And some of those key issues include, we have to work within financial constraints, and we still have to maintain a high standard in the educational landscape. And we also, as archivists and collection managers, have a responsibility to preserve our history, our institutional history. So we need to examine how the issues affecting HBCUs are also affecting the archives and how we can still meet all of our needs. So HBCUs have been in the news, even recently. I'll share some recent news in the next slide. And so we'll look at the challenges. And as you can see, some of the challenges include funding. You have the education secretary with that quote there. Also, you even had the executive VP of research and member engagement at UNCF, even questioning how the schools will survive in the next 20 years within these constraints that we are facing. And then also, you see how many times HBCUs do not get the same funding that other institutions, even in their own states, will receive, which Matt Richmond commented on the discrepancies with Ole Miss and also Jackson State. And also in recent news, last week, they were talking about the $500 million gift that the Trump administration gave to HBCUs. And you have the senior vice president at UNCF welcoming those additional resources. So these are just some brief challenges facing the archives at HBCUs.
Okay.
And we have staff shortage, outdated technology sometimes. Sometimes the technologies may be obsolete. Also, we have a lack of funding in some cases. And also, we have to struggle to stay abreast of disaster response and recovery in case those things do happen.
Historically, we have been basically always staff, a shortage of staff and having access to the technologies that were needed. At most of our institutions for years, the archives was handled as a extra duty a lot of times for a librarian. We did not, and we lacked some of the archival training necessarily to process and preserve our collections. Back in the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s, 3 archivists in Georgia put together a NEH grant that provided some of that training for many of us. That was Brenda Banks, who was then the deputy director of the Georgia State Archives, Taronda Spencer, who was at Spelman at the time, and Karen Jefferson, who was at the Woodruff Library at Atlanta University. That training, particularly for Tuskegee, provided a lot of the information that we needed and access and entry into how to actually process our collections, make them accessible, and care for them, and do at least the basic preservation and conservation that needed to be done for those collections. Now, over the years, we have progressed in terms of that, with multitudes of grants that have gone to 1890s institutions and to other institutions and collaborative efforts with outside funding. And so we're in a better place than we were, but we still got a long way to go.
And also, we had some great pioneers who started this vital work at the Tuskegee University Archives, and these were just some images. And we started with Monroe N work, and during that time, it was the Department of Records and Research.
Okay. All right. The Monroe work opened the Department of Records and Research. He was recruited to Tuskegee around 1908, basically to assist with providing statistical information to Booker T. Washington for his speeches, to make sure that whatever he said about the Negro was verifiable or could be verified with data. Jessie Guzman replaced Mr. Work on his retirement in 1940, and continued with the Department of Records and Research's work, primarily responsible for the lynching records or the statistical data gathered for the annual lynching report the Tuskegee Institute produced until roughly 1963. Daniel T. Williams became the first university archivist when the Department of Records and Research was closed and then merged with all of the documents that Mr. Work had collected, as well as other documentation within the university's records. He became the first archivist. It should be known that Mr. Work worked very hard to get Booker T. Washington's records taken by the Library of Congress. That was one of his last efforts before his retirement. I'm Cynthia Wilson. I was the coordinator of our archives and museum. It's kind of a bridge work. I worked for Dr. Williams. I'm a native to the area, and I basically have a lot of institutional knowledge, which aided in my being able to work in the area. Dana Chandler replaced me as the actual archivist for the university, and currently Cheryl Ferguson is serving as the senior university archivist based on her experience in the last 15 years of working with these records.
Yeah, so we have a rich history, and those pioneers of the Tuskegee University Archives really set us to where we are today. And so now we're going to look at some of the solutions on how we are answering the call and remaining relevant and also current in these uncertain times. So one of the first solutions is that we connect with institutional leaders and administration. That's a vital part of our work. Our senior university archivist, who you saw in the previous slide, she has a great relationship and fosters those relationships with our key leaders and upper administration, ensuring that the archives are valued. And that value is reflected in the support that we receive towards our department. Also, it's not only the support that comes towards us, but also those institutional leaders, they're enhancing their knowledge and understanding of not only the history of the archives, but also the vital work and the details that go into what we do. And of course, it's good to note some of the challenges when it comes to this first solution is that it can be a complex process, keeping them involved because, they have various busy and time-consuming schedules. So, you have to make sure that you're working with their schedules, but also just remember that fostering relationships does require work, time, and commitment, but it's possible if you take into those accounts. Also, with our solution 2, this is what we do consistently. We identify outside funding. Often we collaborate with the other library services department, whether it's the library or also the Legacy Museum, and we all keep each other in the loop about grants that are coming up and application dates and deadlines. And we look at different possibilities to get additional funding. And there are benefits with this because that means that the archives are not dependent only on our budget that we get from the university, but also it helps us to increase our opportunities to expand our systems or even introduce new technologies. And then also additional staff and or interns can be hired with this additional funding. And recently we even received a lyricist grant to put in place the collection space for our Legacy Museum, which is a collection management software, and it also archive space. to manage the information in the archives also. So just introducing those technologies is possible because of grants that we were able to acquire. And some of the challenges include these funds from the grants will eventually deplete. So we're always looking at long-term solutions and what we can do for the future to maintain these systems and technologies that we are putting in place. And also grants do require time and work. You know, you have to do those meetings with your grant specialist, you have to submit reports, and even one of our grants requires publications. And so you have to take that into account when you're identifying outside funding.
One of the areas that you may not have thought about that most of us don't think, our collections have a asset value to our institutions. They can be worth money, which means it does give the university something that it can put on its asset line in relationship to it. However, if your collections have not been appraised, or you have not had, that's something you may want to consider having done, particularly if you have collectibles, or if there are items with signatures, things of that nature. You really need to look and see whether or not those collections have some monetary value. That will increase your visibility with your university administration if they realize that there's a dollar value to some of what you're doing.
Definitely. That is so true. Also, we often do this. We collaborate with surrounding institutions and universities. And so some of the benefits of that is that repositories, we can share resources with each other, you know, whether those are scanners or technologies. Also, each site can mutually enlighten each other on the best practices. Sometimes we're introduced to new systems and technologies that we didn't even consider in the past. So it's good to have those collaborations. Also, when we collaborate with other institutions, there's an increased opportunity in the form of presentations, publications, joint programs, and more. And I know some of the recent institutions we collaborated with include Auburn University. We've collaborated with the National Park Service. We recently had our senior university archivist and our postdoctoral fellow visit Clark Atlanta University's archives and look at their technology. Other collaborations you could think about with and so you have to remember that there are challenges with that because, you know, it is time consuming. Time is always a thing. Traveling to surrounding sites takes away from the time needed in the archives. Also, scheduling meetings with the surrounding areas can be complex because everyone is busy. And finally, a bonus solution, which I think is really relevant for this conference, is to stay abreast of the current industry standards. And we do this consistently in our archives. So it's a benefit to it because we are ensuring that we're preserving and conserving our collection at the highest level. Also, our staff are remaining informed of the current practices and standards of the field. Also, there are opportunities for increased funding, and we're ready to recommend new technologies, softwares, and materials. And we do this by staying abreast of professional development opportunities. We consistently, all of us go to classes, conferences, we take advantage of free webinars, and we are all members of the professional organizations of AAAM, the Society of American Archivists, the American Library Association, and so many more. We also request demos of new systems and technologies, and we do this because so we could have that contact with those possible vendors, and when those institutional leaders ask for recommendations of new technologies, we're ready. Also, at every opportunity, we visit other archives to look at their processes and connect with those archival staff, and also we foster relationships and professionals with experts of the field.
Please remember that part of what you're doing is trying to preserve access to the information. So whatever we can do to make sure that we have the information, whether we have the actual artifact or not, is crucial in terms of it. But also look at your artifacts in terms of preservation and conservation and care for them. Those are important. If you don't have the artifact, you don't have an archives. So in the end, HBCUs have always adjusted. We've always had these struggles, but we still survived and even thrived during uncertain times.
The founder of Tuskegee University, Dr. Booker T. Washington, he was committed to ensuring the long-term sustainability of the institution. And we talked about the development of the Department of Records and Research, and it was occurring during a period where African Americans were gaining increased rights, but we were still facing limitations due to enforced segregation and disenfranchisement. And so our founders were able to secure that outside funding, foster relationships with philanthropists, and even gain support and buy-in from the Black community. And so we're implementing those same practices and those same strategies in the current era and applying them to the Tuskegee University archives. And a driving belief throughout our institution is honoring our past and investing in our future. Therefore, we are really striving to execute the strategies of our pioneers of the institution while ensuring that we continue to endure. These are the references from today's presentation. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to email us, and that's where our contact information is. And we will be available for the question and answer session. Thank you.
Okay.